One, we covered what audits are, who does them, and how risk assessment works. Week two is where things start getting real because now you actually have to build the plan. And I'll be honest, I didn't realize how much goes into an audit plan before this specific week. I always thought it was just making a checklist and that will be that. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. So, what is the audit plan? An audit plan has 5 core pieces, and each one matters in their own right. The first is objectives and timeline. Basically, what are you trying to find out, and when does this need to be done? It sounds obvious, but if you're vague here, it shows up in your findings later. Now, the second is scope, and honestly, this is the one that trips people up the most. Scope is just what exactly are you auditing? Which systems should be audited, which department, and which processes? The temptation is just to say everything, but scope creep is a real thing and it kills audits. Now, you've got framework and identification as another core piece of the audit plan, and this is basically talking about what standards apply to this organization. After that is threat and vulnerability analysis, which builds directly off the risk register from what we talked about in week one. And finally, team and document review. This speaks to who's on the audit team and what documents you need before you even start. Let's talk about frameworks here. Now, the framework section is where it really clicked for me, and here's why. There are so many compliance standards. Now, these standards are not random. They're tied to specific industries and data types. For example, we have PCI-DSS, which is for anyone touching payment card data. We have HIPAA, which talks to healthcare. We have the NIST 853, which caters to federal agencies and their contractors. And then the ISO 20701, which is the international standard, and anyone can actually use it. And here's something that the course made really clear that I think is worth spelling out, is that a framework and a regulation are not the same thing. So a regulation like HIPAA has legal force, whereas if you violate it, there are real consequences like legal fines, actions such as, criminal charges that an organization or even an individual can find themselves tied to. Now, a framework like NIST is sort of like best practices. Following it might be voluntary unless a contract or a regulation specifically requires it. Now, that distinction matters a lot in GRC work because it changes how you document your findings and what happens if something isn't compliant. Let's move on and talk about interviews. So one thing I didn't expect week 2 to get into was interviewing, actually showing, and that means actually showing how to conduct an audit interview. But it makes total sense when you think about it because the document tells you what the policy says. The interviews tell you what people actually do. And that gap right there between the policy and what's actually happening is usually where the real findings are. The way it was taught is basically you prepare specific questions tied to the controls you're going to be evaluating. You interview the people who actually operate the systems, not just whoever wrote the policy. You document what they say without editorializing anything. You just put it as is. And then you look for inconsistencies. And this is between what one person says, what the other person says, or between what someone tells you versus what the documentation that they're actually giving you shows. And that last part where we talk about, the inconsistencies between what they say and what they document, that is where real audit interviews actually become useful. Now, we also had a lab in this week as well. And so for this lab, we were building a complete audit plan for the same company that we did for week 1. We had to define a scope, identify applicable frameworks, map out the threat analysis, basically figure out who gets interviewed, and pull it all into one structured document. And the hardest part for me was the scope decision, because the natural instinct here is to include everything given the case study that we're working from, every system, every department, every process. And my feedback kept coming back to the same thing. An audit that tries to cover everything covers nothing. So scoping is a discipline that must be adapted. Now you have to decide what's in and what's out and be able to explain why you're making this call. And that's a skill that shows up constantly in actual GRC work. So all in all, my honest take on week 2 is that the framework section initially felt like pure, just memorizing terms and HIPAA covers this and PCI covers that. And at that level, it kind of felt monotonous. But again, the haha moment came for me when I was able to start connecting each framework to, let's say, a real breach I already knew about. HIPAA, healthcare data leaks, PCI, we're talking about credit card information being leaked, corporate scandals. Each framework had a real story behind it, and that's what started to make it connect all together for me. Now, the requirements for this project stopped feeling arbitrary, and it started to actually make sense. So if you're studying for GRC or CISA, or you're working towards a GRC cert, that is the approach that I would use. Connect each of the frameworks to like a real world scenario. So week 2's verdict, it was more hands-on than week 1 and way more applicable. The audit plan lab itself was actually really useful, not because the scenario was complex, but because making real scope decisions under constraints teaches you something about prioritization that no lecture can teach you. Now, as it relates to the, career relevance for GRC, this is a core part of it. Being able to produce a structured, defensible audit plan is something that you'll do constantly in a compliance or GRC analyst role. And that's all I have for you today on week 2. Coming up in week 3, that is where it gets really intense. We go from planning to actually conducting the audit. We'll be including a PCI-DSS audit using the SAQD questionnaires, which is over 281 individual requirements. Now that video is dropping with this one, so you can just dive right into it. I'm cybermaica. This is Camo Code Academy. Subscribe if you want to follow this in real time, and I'll see you in week 3.